So, from my side, a real pleasure to be here. I suppose a little bit of background on what I'm going to talk about tonight. My sense is that when we come to sessions like this, we actually want to learn something new. We don't just want to learn from somebody and to have them speak at us or to us. We actually want to work in this because we're coaches. And so my commitment this evening is that hopefully you'll learn a new skill, a new competency, a new capacity that you can walk away with and use. Because otherwise this has been a glorious waste of time. My own journey into this work started in 1999. In my country we had our second general election. Our second general election after Nelson Mandela was released. And that general election was a critical election because it was, is it going to be free and fair? And I spent my life before coaching as a strategy consultant and a strategy partner. And I was pretty burnt out from that work. So I was on the beach, literally. And I had a colleague of mine phone me and said, listen, Craig, we've landed a massive project to run the supply chain for that general election. And actually we need your guidance, advice and help. Could you work with the chief electoral officer, who was a black law professor, never been out of university, never understood anything about process systems or anything like that. Could you work with him? And I had no idea what I was going to do. But that was the journey, that was the invitation that changed my life. Because I worked with him for 6 months, and literally it was 24 hours a day for 6 months, to try and work with him, not teams, not organizations, but him, to build his capacity and confidence to actually be the figurehead of a general election. And out of that, that's when I started to realize I don't want to work with organizations anymore. I don't want to work with teams. I actually want to work with leaders, but I actually don't know how. And that's when I started my own journey. Coaching in my country didn't exist. If you said I'm a coach, it was, what sport are you coaching? Still happens in some parts of the world. So I traveled to the United States, to San Francisco, and I spent 3 years going back to school at that stage. And that journey for the last 16 years has changed my life. And so what I wanted to share with you is some of the ways that we work as integral coaches. And maybe that could, in some humble way, give you some insights as to what you might be doing, or not. So some of the background. Where do I come from? You'll see a whole series of logos on the side. What started 16 years ago was a Center for Coaching, which was a strategic alliance with the University of Cape Town's Graduate School of Business. I don't work for the business school, but it's a trend in modern universities that they'll pull people and say, we need a center of excellence. We know nothing about this. Should we go into partnership? But what that's done is it started to explode. It started to include New Ventures West, who are an integral coaching school in San Francisco, which we have a strong alliance with. We are this year, and we launched it this year, we started a Center for Integral Leadership. What is it and how do leaders lead in an integral way? And obviously the question is, how do you lead yourself first? So much of the mistake that leaders make is, I'm leading out there instead of leading inside. And the Graduate School of Business has been great for us because even though the dean at the time knew nothing about coaching, it was a case of, I think you're saying something that makes sense. Let's experiment, let's try, let's take a risk. And I always take my hat off to him because I think that's why this work has evolved. So, yeah, we run that Center of Excellence. I think there are 2 parts to our lives. We run teaching, which is my first love. I think it's a lesson late in life, because I think this is the work I was born to do. But it took me 50 odd years to find that lesson. And it's taken me another long time to really step into that. And part of the teaching that we do is ICF accredited stuff. So we run a 6-month and a year-long course, both of which we're running. Firstly, the ACC is being run in Switzerland for the last 2 years. And next year we launch our first year-long course here. And then a lot of the work that we do is the Center for Integral Leadership is working with leaders in an integral way. How is it that you can start to shift and that you do. So there's some really exciting work, and quite frankly, it's taken us around the world. And I think some of the lessons we've learned from our own transformation as a nation are hopefully humbly what we can start to give to the rest of the world. That's a little bit of background. This is an interesting slide because it's a slide which says, well, if you're going to teach this work, where does it come from? And I think the mistake that often coaches make these days is that they go out and they say, well, I did a 2-week course and I think I can coach the world. And I think what we really are saying is that I know, for me, that the last 16 years have taught me that the more I learn, the less I know. And therefore, ongoing learnership, ongoing apprenticeship, ongoing preparedness to actually say, it's what I don't know, because I'm working with this mystical thing called a human being, is where we need to be. But some of the background, we did a map a couple of years ago. A group of us got together from around the world and said, in integral coaching, where does this work come from? We have a whole series of models that we work with, but we have a whole series of streams: philosophical, the biology and the cognitive sciences, spirituality, because way of being and meaning is critical, I think, in this modern era. Psychology has made an important contribution. And then a vital thing called narrative, which is something we work with as coaches. What's the story that this person is living in? What's a new story that they might step into? And just to give you some sense, and I'll leave a copy of the slide with you, these are some of the backgrounds, because I think we're standing on the shoulders of giants. There's some incredible philosophers, thinkers, who knew nothing about coaching 20, 30, 40, 100 years ago. But I think that's the wisdom that we're actually building on and saying, we knew a lot. So what is it about modern man that believes that we actually know more? I think we know less. And unless we're prepared to go back to our elders and learn from them, I think wisdom in the modern world is something that shifts. So, that's a little bit of background. What I wanted to talk about this evening is something that I'm going to call self-observation. And often in the world of coaching, there are a variety of coaches. Some coaches who believe we tell you what to do, because that's our job. Some coaches who believe we introduce ideas for you and hopefully in some way make it feel like your own. And other coaches who say, perhaps the best way is I can walk this road with you as a partner. But what I can do is I can start to allow you to start becoming the architect of your own future. But how? How do we do that? Because I think the challenge, as we know, when we live in this world of ours, is that we live in a world which I see the world in my own particular way. And whatever it is I'm seeing, quite frankly, is such a fraction of what's really going on. And often that's what gets us stuck, or closes down possibilities, or doesn't allow us to see that there are other ways of thinking and doing things. The other thing as coaches, I think we realize in this world that I'm not only a head, I think in certain ways, I'm also a heart. I have feelings and I feel and emote in certain ways, which open things up. And then I have this incredible thing called a body. And I think the work of integral coaching says if I want to work with somebody, work with not only the head, voila, work with the heart, but also how do we start working with the body, the somatics of another human being. I think this is an important part of work, because once again, there are certain schools of coaching who will come at this in a very different way. And we're not saying we know the answers to this. I think we're starting to say that I think the more we learn, the less we really understand. But I think what we're trying to do is, can we help this human being to see things in a new way so that new possibilities arise? And one of the best ways for the human being to learn that is through their own observation of what's happened for themselves. Because then that lesson sticks. It's not like somebody gave it to me. It's not like a book gave it to me. We all know, we've read books, we've gone out there and said, brilliant idea. But what we haven't done is we haven't done anything with that. So I think the domain of self-observation that I'd like to explore tonight, because we could talk about emotional, we could also talk about the body. I'd like to focus here for this evening. And this is a brilliant quote from thousands of years ago. Knowing others others is a wisdom, knowing yourself is real enlightenment. And I think what self-observation is trying to gift people with is, do I have the capacity to truly understand myself? And what's getting in the way? What's closing that down? What's shutting me off from seeing new possibilities? So, this is an interesting one, defining coaching. And quite frankly, there are many people in this room, and I'm sure if we actually got together and did a project and said, let's come up with a definition of coaching, we could probably cover the walls with definitions. So this is a humble suggestion that coaching is a partnership, and therefore we're equals, unlike other relationships, mentoring, managing, etc., where I have some power, some authority. This builds the coachee's ability to observe and select appropriate actions. Okay, that's really, really tough, because what if I can't see those actions? What if I don't have a way of seeing them? And that maximize their impact and to increase their capacity to adjust behaviors and actions to achieve their intended outcomes. That's a mouthful. So what I like to focus on in that definition is just one part. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Because quite frankly, unless I as a coach can work with the client to build their capacity to observe and leave them with that gift, they will continually be dependent either on themselves or me's or others like me in the world. And so the greatest gift I think we can give the coachee is, can I build your capacity to observe you in the context of the world, so that you see how you open possibilities, but also how you close them down. And that's what we're going to work on tonight. How can that be? So before I start, any thoughts or questions? Any comments? Any opinions? Any so whatses? Please.
I would say as a prerequisite, you need to be able to have this ability to observe yourself before being able to share it.
Absolutely. As a coach, you mean?
Yes.
And that's why so much of coaching, I think we learn about how to coach, but I think so much of coaching is, can you learn about yourself? And so much of the education in coaching needs to be directed inwards, not outwards to the other. Any other thoughts that come up from what I've said so far? It's going to be a slow night. I'm going to get you working. So, yeah, please.
Why are you focusing on the head of your interval? Why not do the heart and body as well?
We do. What I'd like to do, though, for this evening is to say, I'd love to do all of these, but we'll be here for the next 3 years. So all I'm doing is to say, what is it about self-observation, which is the kind of, how do I observe myself in the world, that might add some value to the work we do. I wish I could talk about all three. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay.
So it's self-observation same as self-awareness?
Well, I suppose, how do I become self-aware? What is it that creates self-awareness? Maybe this is the doorway or the gateway to becoming self-aware. Because I think, often out there, self-awareness isn't something that, ding, I'm self-aware. I think it's a competence and capacity I have to build. And that, there are some of us who have this wonderful experience of being enlightened, the Damascus experience where I fall off my horse on the way to a city or whatever. But for most of us, I think it's a competence we need to build. Anything else? Okay. So, this is a picture maybe of perhaps how we work, and it's offered as a gift. And with any gift, somebody can accept it and say thank you very much. But with gifts, we can also, with invitations, we can also say thank you very much, but I'm not interested. So offered in the humility and the respect that offering a gift does. And I think when we try to coach, we're trying to develop integral change. We're trying to actually help the human being to shift all of themselves, not just to come up with new ideas, not just to feel better about themselves, not just to take actions or decisions. We're actually trying to coach the whole. And I think there's two critical parts to that. Can I help the person build capacity for awareness? Because long after they leave me or you, if I can have given them the capacity for awareness, quite frankly, they become self-correcting. They start to generate their own capacity. They no longer need me. This is the one job in the world where actually the finest outcome is to build myself out of a job. It's the only job I've had in the world where we do that. When I sold strategy, it was, how can I make this organization dependent on me? So we're there for not just $1 million, but another 10 or 30 years. Okay. I think the second part is, can I help that person to build a capacity to act in a different way? And often, many kind of interventions say, let's just focus on here. Let's get you doing different things. But my sense is, when we're doing that without this, we're doing it in a blind way. And so, I suppose there are things that we do in our kind of coaching where we assign exercises and practices, which are body-based things. I'm not going to talk about those this evening. Love to. We just don't have the time. So what I'd like to focus on is, what is a self-observation? And what are the self-reflections that we can give people? Maybe something to think about is, I'm building the person's capacity, because if we're honest, we go through life, and for most of us, when you ask us, how was the day? How was that drive? Where did you get to? How have you come from? Most of us will be I'm not quite sure. I'm actually not sure. How was the meeting? Not really sure. Because the focus is on either the task or the outcome or the thing we were doing. We're certainly not aware of ourselves. We're certainly not always aware of others. And we're certainly not aware of the interaction of what happened in that environment. And so if I can gift the person with this competence of self-observation, they start to go into a situation being able to observe, sense, and feel. And actually, in the moment, their capacity is to be able to change. That's going to take time. So our kind of coaching says, let's focus on integral development. Self-remembering is an extraordinary concept which was brought into the Western world by Georges Gurdjieff, an Armenian. And for those of you who know anything about the Enneagram, Georges Gurdjieff was the father of the Enneagram. But one of the things he would do, he would take his students, and they were in France, out at a villa. From time to time, what would happen during the day is the bell would ring, random times, and they would pause, stop. What have I been doing? What's come before? How did I get here? Doing whatever task I was doing. What would I like to do differently for the rest of the day? Because for most of us, the day is a blur, it finishes. And quite frankly, tomorrow is simply going to be the same pattern. But if I build the capacity on a regular basis to what's happened, breathe, think about how I've got here, and what am I going to do going forward, that's powerful. But the really exciting part is in a moment when I'm about to challenge somebody or actually say something that's going to be offensive to somebody, can I in that moment and do something different? And that is what the gift of self-observation is. It's building internally within a person this capacity to actually become a witness to what they're really doing or not. So, that capacity for ongoing awareness, can we start making considered choices? Or are we simply, as Gurdjieff used to say about the world, most of us, most of the time, are asleep. We are. And yet, do I build the capacity of this person to wake up to what's really happening in their world? To become more aware of themselves? I think that is the greatest gift I can leave behind. Because then they become the architects of their own future. So, why does it matter? I talked about the first point. I think the second point is, our challenge is, are we fully present and attentive? Am I really, really here? For most of us, we're either living in the past, what happened, heck of a day, I wish I hadn't said that, Why did he say that to me? Could I have done something different? A lot of us are living in the future, really anxious about what I'm about to do, don't know how I'm going to prepare for that meeting. How could I possibly do that? And very few of us are actually here. Because there is no past. It's gone. And sadly, for some of us, we may walk out of here and there is no future. The only moment I can start to really own and colonize fully is the present. And yet we don't do it. We're constantly avoiding, dancing away from, skipping away from that. I think the third point is, this is the source of all possibility. I mean, if I'm in this present moment, I think the key part of the present is, here is the source of all possibility. There, it's gone. The future has not arrived. Here is the source of all possibility to do and be and change something. And so how do I learn to actually be here more often? If I could leave a coachee with a gift to do that, what would it create for them in terms of becoming self-generating in this world? What would it do to give them the capacity to, in that moment, make the choice? The real challenge with self-observation, though, this is really difficult to do. Because most of us are going to be in that blur. We'll talk about how we do that. I think the fourth thing is, if I am fully aware, I'm really going to pay attention to not only now, but what is it about now that might impact the future? What choice am I going to take now? Action? What am I going to say that might impact the future? But most of us are mindless. We'll simply do something and afterwards it will be, damn, it happened. Too late. And so, can I build in a person and a human being, only in terms of how they see the world, that capacity to see it differently? And the final one is, I think if I can be really present and I can pay attention, I can start to colonize now. Because unfortunately, though we'd like to think differently, I'm a strategist. I spent years selling organizations the future. And I'm horrified about what we did. Because the future never turned out like it should have done. But if we focused on working with those leadership and those teams to say, what can you shift and change now, perhaps the future might have been radically different. So, self-observations, I think, for most of us, actually, and I'll be radical with this, we actually don't like now. We really don't like now. Because if we liked now, and we were okay with it, we could just be calm here, now. But most of us are, no, I can't sit still. Most of our, how can I fix what I did in the past? A lot of us are actually saying, look, I can't sit down. But I think what we're building the capacity is here, now. It's all I can be. If I can be that, I can really, really start to change the future. Instead of waiting for it to hit me or arrive to me, I suddenly become, what is it that I can do or change or shift how I think, how I feel, or how I act to change it? So, self-observation, I think, is a doorway to doing something radical.
I'm curious.
Please.
What is the difference between being present and paying attention?
Well, if I'm being present and I'm here, perhaps it's both. Being present is I'm here. I'm really here. Great, I'm here. But am I listening to what's really going on? Am I observing and noticing what's happening in this room? Am I actually kind of reflecting on what I'm hearing? So being present is all very one, but there are some people who will be present and then you'll still ask them what's actually happening. So I need to be actually paying attention to various things that are happening. I mean, we're a being with 5 senses, in fact 6. And am I using all of those senses to sense where and what and how I am? And I suppose what our kind of coaching is saying is, perhaps if we build the sense, because the mistake we make as modern human beings, we all believe what the ancient Greeks believed, we are a head. A body. And we still believe that the brain drives us. Well, modern scientific research says, sorry, it does not. Most of the sensing happens first, the stimulus, then there's a sense, and already what that does is my body informs the brain that my body has started to act. So unfortunately, the brain is an extraordinary thing, but a lot of the intelligence of the human being is there. And I think that that's what self-observation is starting to do. Am I noticing what's going here? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Instead of going to here is, what do I think? I'm afraid I think, therefore I am. Beautiful philosophical statement. It's not really true.
What's the sixth sense?
Intuition. I sense. And I think as we start to develop the other senses, what we start to realize is that the marriage of all of those five together actually creates that other. I walked into the room and I was unsettled. Don't know how, don't know why. But I start to trust that. I start to trust that my senses are actually giving me something back. And I think at the end of the day, if we as coaches can leave behind that competence with somebody rather than fix their problem, perhaps they start to be able to sense a new way of doing things after that. So my focus, and this is the challenge in coaching, is if we're working with somebody, and they arrive with a challenge or an issue or a problem, for us, mentoring, parenting, being a bud, being a lecturer, being a friend, what most of us are very comfortable with doing, you arrive with a problem, let's focus here. Let me try and resolve, sort, validate, do this. Actually, I think as coaches, our real challenge is, can I work with you, only you, so that you resolve your issue? And therefore, if I can build a competency like your capacity to self-observe, perhaps you start to actually say, I think I realize what triggers those issues in meetings that I am. I've observed for 3 months how I am and show up in a management meeting. I've started to realize what the source of that is. It's me. Because I can't change them. I like to think I am. And those of us who've been in leadership positions like to feel we can instruct, guide, tell, bully people into doing things. But quite frankly, most of the time, actually, what I need to do is focus on myself as a leader. And so this capacity for self-observation starts to become really powerful, because I cannot change their problem or their possibility. What I can work as a coach to do is change their capacity to see new ways of doing this. That's the gift of self-observation. So, I kind of feel like I'm spoken for a while, so cut to the chase. I think what we're trying to do is, for most of us, if we're honest, most of the time, we're actually divorced and detached from who we really are. There are ways that we can start to bring ourselves with ourselves, but a lot of the time we're actually disconnected. And I think what we're trying to do with self-observation is, most of the time we try and change after the fact. With self-observation, we're trying to say, can this person become so aware that in the moment of something happening, they can shift or change something? And even more powerfully, can I get the person to really anticipate that change? I'm starting to read that room, I'm starting to sense something. My sense is something's going to happen. Here's what I think I need to say before it happens. And this journey is a lifetime. But what if I, as a coach, allowed the person to start stepping along that pathway to real self-awareness? What if that's the gift I could leave them with? And hopefully, but self-observation may be one of the key things as I really start to become really self-aware. Because I realize that it's only my change. I cannot change others or the world. I really can only change me. So, what I'd like to do is give you an example of a self-observation. This is a self-observation I gave to an executive. What the executive was doing was really, really struggling with, Craig, I interact with my team, but I seem to be detached from that team. And actually when I walk into meetings, I'm not really sure where or who or how I'm coming from. And actually the feedback I'm getting from my team is I'm variable. It's almost they kind of take a look at me walking down the corridor and say what mood or place or whatever he's in, and then we know what to do, and it's going to be different. How can I be a little bit more consistent? So this is an observation I designed with him. So the first thing about a self-observation you're inviting somebody is invent by declaration a separation in you. One person who does what they do, one person who's not a critic, not a judge, not an evaluator, but somebody who's witnessing and watching what you do. Using the questions below, begin to observe yourself as you go through the day. Observe quietly, passively. I don't have to tell anyone that I'm self-observing. I don't have to reveal that I'm actually taking this risk of self-observation. I'm doing it with and for me. Observe your internal states. So it's not only what's going on here, what's going on here, what's going on here. So that's how observation starts to become integral. You're not only asking the person to think, you're asking the person to, how are you feeling? What sensations are you noticing in your body? And keep coming back to this patiently. So what you're asking the person to do is going through the day, start observing what's actually happening. And stop a couple of times, maybe at tea time. How did that day go? Disaster. Well, what would you do differently for the rest of the day? Carry on. So I recommit to doing something differently until lunchtime. How did that go? Cum si, cum sa. Some of it was good, some of it was horrific. What would I do again for the rest of the afternoon? And I really make a commitment so the day isn't a blur. And then in the evening, I actually get a chance to look back on the rest of the day and say, ¿Qué pasa? How was that day for me? And in the evening, I have this wonderful opportunity to do something that I really encourage all of my coaches to do. Do some reflection. Now, I don't like journaling. No, I can't write. So draw a picture. Talk into a microphone. Do something that actually paint a picture, quite frankly. Do something that represents that day for yourself. So here, stop once at lunchtime, reflect on back in the morning. What kind of energy did I use? It's almost saying, as this boss, as this leader, what kind of energy was being projected into the room? How did that affect me emotionally, physically, mentally? And then, what was the impact on people or the person around me? And what would I like to do differently this afternoon? So what you're giving the person is this gift of not arriving at the end of the day with, what was the day like? It's a blur. You're giving the opportunity to walk through something, continue to stop. What could I do? Change. And so they start becoming the architects of their own shifts and changes. I could also in the evening, which is really great, how often did I propel myself through emotions? What was the consequence? What could I have done differently if I had to do this over again? And how can I do this differently tomorrow? And what am I learning about myself? I think what the wonder of coaching is, I think what we're really trying to create is we're trying to create a context where people can start to become deep learners about themselves. And I'm not doing it for them. I think the mistake we often make about coaching is that we talk about this language of coaching moments. And I think the mistake we often make is I'm sitting with the client and it's in this moment that the insights, kapows and wows are going to happen. I don't think so. I think it's the moments in between that the real insights happen. And what I'm trying to help the person to do is, what's happened? What could I do differently? What am I learning? But as coaches, what is it that we're doing for the person to help them build a capacity in between coaching sessions? And perhaps that's what self-observation could do. Instead of me being the coach, I'm going to the coach today. Maybe the coach is designing something where I become my own witness for the rest of that passage during the week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, until I see them again.
Great. Can I just ask,
Please.
how often did I prepare myself for action through emotions? Can you build on that question? I'm not sure if I quite get it.
Well, at the end of the day, how often, at the end of the day, I could have propelled it by sensing something. I could have propelled by going to my head, what's the right thing to do? For him, the issue was you keep kind of going into it, and this is a very specific one, so I made him redesign it for somebody else. His was triggered by my heart. What am I feeling? If it was a head person, I might say, how often did I trigger it by here? If it's a body-based person, I might say, how often did your senses trigger you?
Okay.
So that's the kind of modification. I'm not sure that I can say much more. I think we need to experience this. So here's the invitation. I'd like you to pair up with a partner, and what I'd like you to do is either think about a coaching client that you have at the moment, or even more kind of risque, think about yourself. What is a self-observation that you think you might need or your client might need? What would you title it? I think the titling is so important, because talk about what's the story we're trying to understand. So it's almost like we talk about narrative in the coaching. What would be the movie that you're stepping into each and every day to observe yourself? So for my executive, it might be, the frustrated manager. How often were you cycling into that? So this is the invitation to think about what would be an observation, an area that would really help you. If I had more awareness and insight, or if my client had more, my coachee, what would help there? What would be the purpose? What are you trying to give the person awareness of? And then what would be the instructions? What would you ask the person to do? Go through the day, separate yourself, observe 2 or 3 things. What would the questions be that you're going to ask them to do at the beginning or during and afterwards? And then how often would you want them to do this? Is it once a day, twice a day, the whole day, once a week? Some observations can be designed just, I'm having my board meetings on a weekly basis. Great, let's do the observation there. So rather than me sitting blabbering here, how would that feel? You design some observations. Choose a person you don't know, because that's another great way of actually building community in a context like this. And let's take the next 20 minutes and then see what comes up. What I'm going to ask integral coaches in this room to do is to stand, please. So here are some faces. There's some others.
Am I?
I think so.
Okay.
What the hell are we
En
doing for the
Dominica,
last 6 months?
we alle.
So here are some, if you're struggling with it, here are some people who can walk around the room and give some advice, guidance, coach you through this, not give you the answer, but spread around the room. And let's get back at 1:15. Let's go.
Maybe